lounge and tell them that it's underway. Whack on the window, it's more appropriate. Hard, like the prison service.
Not too hard, it might go through.
I'll charge it.
Have we got Nick here?
Neville, have we got Nick on the way? Oh, yes, he's
Yes, I'm online.
Kia ora, councillors. The adjourned meeting is now reopened. The time is 2 minutes past 1. And the first item after lunch is section part 2 of our agenda, is that of health and safety. It's page 81 on your hard copy of your agenda. And we have our Manager of Health and Safety online, Nick. We've got a pretty well full complement today. Yep, Councillor Mahuta just coming in, and we're away. We're in your hands, Nick, and looking forward to your presentation today and report. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou, councillors. I'm working remotely today as one of my children has tested positive, so unfortunately I can't be with you in person. So the report you've got in your pack today covers a number of topics. COVID again features quite prominently. At the time the report was written during March, of course, we were under the red settings of the COVID protection framework and had a number of BCP arrangements in place to support the effective operations of the organisation. Things were changing quite quickly during March, so you'll see there from the paper the My Vaccine Pass requirements for staff and visitors ceased effectively from the 4th of April, reflecting both the changed transmission risk associated with Omicron, but also public health advice. We've been working quite hard to be ready for that move to orange, and of course that happened on the 13th of April at 11:59 p.m. And so we're currently under that operating arrangements, which has allowed us to reduce some of the bubble type arrangements for staff working under BCPs. In terms of staff wellbeing with COVID, we've got a very good workflow, so we're keeping quite an accurate track of reporting rates for staff through COVID at the moment. We've been doing that since about mid-February, and our current numbers are roughly around 94 staff to date that have tested positive. That's over that last period from February, so quite an extended period. What we are seeing, though, is increased numbers actually over the last week or so. We've had about 19 in the last 5 days. So watching that one with interest, but we are optimistic, I guess, that the transmission rates do not increase within our staff workforce. In terms of other parts of the report, we're quite pleased with progress on the psychological risk bow tie assessment. Our health and safety team were facilitating sessions on that with staff groups during March and April, and we're in our final stages now of completing that assessment, and that will allow us to begin working on the controls and really working to provide quite a proactive approach to staff wellbeing. You might note in the report there the absence of any near-miss reports, which has been a feature in the last couple of reports. We're quite concerned about that, recognising near-miss reporting has been quite an integral part of our safety prevention opportunities. So a campaign was launched yesterday, in fact, with our managers, really promoting the importance of reporting, including near misses, a bit of information about how to do it, but really emphasising that we use that information to support proactive steps to avoid injuries or incidents actually occurring. I know Council have a genuine and long-standing interest in the concern for staff wellbeing when interacting with members of the public. That's welcomed. You'll note there are 2 incident reports mentioned in the March report. One of those related to an event very late in February that's been investigated through March, and the other for a more recent event. Both those events, well, particularly the first of those in Manaia, has prompted quite a deep review of the whole escalation and reporting process, and that has commenced, and we'll be reporting to Council more fully on the outcome of that work in due course. Probably the final point for me today is with the flu vaccination program having just got underway with the annual seasonal flu vax. Last year we had about 41% of staff vaccinated. This year we're expecting higher than usual demand, given reported, I guess, concern about a higher frequency of flu in the population this season, and so that will commence from next week. But I'll pause there in case there are any questions.
Councillor Story, thanks Nick. First question up, Councillor Story.
Thanks for that report, Nick. Just wanted clarification on paragraph 36 in relation to the aggression, the public aggression with staff. It just seems, when I read that, it seems as though the incident occurred on the last day of February, so it wasn't included in the February report. But then it's also not included in the March report. I just want assurance that that incident doesn't go unrecorded in these tables, because you wouldn't want somebody to look back and try and do an analysis of data and to have something missed out because of this technicality of the reporting date and the incident date. Yeah,
no, I share that concern actually. So we've been looking at the reporting process as a consequence of that particular event, and it was, of course, occurred very late in the month, the last day of the month, and the reason why the system didn't capture it for the February report was because it was in the process of being allocated through the investigation step. But it is a point that alerted us to that risk, I guess, of a gap, and so the health and safety team are looking at both the reporting process, but also ensuring that we capture and alert council through the verbal commentary if there are issues there with the data. Probably the upside of it is that the system itself does hold a full record of all the incidents and events that we have recorded. And so when we do reports and trending analysis, there's no risk of it being absent from that level of data.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks, Russ. Nick, good report. The AMEX case study you put in here, are there any learnings from that are relevant to our chemical storage? I'm assuming, for example, that wherever we've got chemicals stored, the exchange rate for the air and whatnot in the room is such that we're never going to be exposed to a risk like that. That was the first question. Second question is, in the incident reports, most of our vehicles are new or near new vehicles. So I was interested in one of our vehicles having to have its brakes checked. What was going on there?
Yeah, on the second question first, the vehicle inspections we do obviously routinely, so the vehicles are inspected prior to use, and drivers are obviously asked to report any issues that they've identified. I don't have any detail on that particular one, Councillor, but I'm pleased that it was picked up. I mean, generally speaking, those reports allow us to do preventative maintenance work. The vehicles, as you know, are modern. They are regularly serviced and maintained, but of course, things can go wrong, and so that regular check and review is important. But I'm happy to go back with a bit of a further question on that particular one if that's of interest, and report on that subsequently. With the AMEX example, it's a really good one, to be honest, of the risk really of people working with different substances without the appropriate training or information, or in inappropriate conditions. So we share this type of learning to ensure that awareness is constantly reinforced to our staff. But we are very careful with our maintenance and management of the different substances we use, including how they're stored, but also that the staff who are applying various substances in the course of their work are approved to handle those and are equipped to work with them safely, including use of PPE, but also any working conditions that are required. So that forms part of the standard working processes that we have in place.
So Chair, I'm assuming through that answer that the gaseous exchange downstairs for volatiles is fine. And the other thing is, I'm assuming from that answer that it wasn't driver error on the equipment. You've specifically said vehicle brakes, and you didn't say driver error, because it strikes me I'd be staggered if there's anything wrong with the brakes in any of our vehicles. So if we had an issue, you're sure it's not driver error, because that goes back to training and etc.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I need to verify the detail behind that one. I don't have that in front of me, so I couldn't comment with any specificity.
If I could just add, Nick, I think I'm correct in saying in terms of our chemical storage, it has been audited under HASNO and recently, and there were improvements made to that storage.
Yes, and there's a reference to that in the paper where we've purchased a storage cabinet on the basis of that assessment, which WorkSafe have conducted. And that's the outstanding remedial step that we're required to complete to ensure that we are compliant with the regulations.
Thanks for that response. Councillor Litchmark.
Yeah, just follow up from last month with regards to that black stuff being placed over and around the beams. The purpose of that. Remember, I said that I'd noted a crack. I wasn't a structural engineer, but then when that black stuff was plastered over it, it raised my interests. Have you got any further information on that?
Immediately after that meeting, Councillor Litchmark, CEO and I went down and inspected it. We're not structural engineers, so it was just a kind of cursory look, and our CEO is going to give you a response right now.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And Janine's on deck, and she can correct me if I say anything wrong here. My understanding is that was work that had been required as part of the structural build right from the outset. It wasn't required to be done for us to be able to move in the building, but it is work that, of course, it's part of the base build. We don't own it or anything, and that was to follow up in relation. It was continuous work to do what was required to meet the standards initially. Janine, you're online. I don't think that wasn't anything that's emerged since, like as a result from vibration or anything.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, councillors. No, that's correct. We had followed up, and I think communication had been sent to both the Chair and Councillor Litchmark following the walkthrough in the basement, just to note that that wrapping that can be seen was done in terms of the base build code compliance certification prior to our move-in.
Because Janine, you know, I know we made notes after Councillor Litchmark raised it at the last full council meeting. When CEO and I went down there, I mean, it does look jerry. It's painted black. I mean, we're built on top of a railway line. Gosh, it just, I know our CEO just said it's not our building, but the health and safety of 525 people is our concern. So you've given our assurance that that is meeting the building codes, the NBS, and we're okay in regard to structure. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I've got a question I'd like to raise, Mr. CEO, to Nick, and the CEO's okayed it with me. And you might think it's a little bit of left field. Look, this is where I sit. We've got our staff, I guess, probably 90%, I guess, are in KiwiSave. They've taken a plunge of 18% since Christmas. Do you ever kind of have I know you've got to be very careful the way you put this, otherwise you look as if you're kind of guiding a particular person to either sell, buy more, or whatever, and I understand that would be very, very difficult. But we're, you know, a staff person that brings assets at home may have a beach house or a boat, but really their future income is not going to be $425 a week to live on. It's going to be the KiwiSaver. And given such a plunge in the share market, and it's going one way, in my personal opinion, is south, do you ever have kind of any independent, neutral financial persons talk to staff at any time, or are they available if staff require them?
Yes, it's an important question. We know financial wellbeing can be quite a pressure for people. We do a few things. We have routine or regular annual sort of training options for people to attend with financial advice included, particularly focused on retirement planning. So that's something we run for staff and encourage people to do it early in mid-career, not waiting till late in career to attend those sessions. And we are looking currently also at a more, I guess, a more broader scoped seminar that staff can also attend for the same purpose, just general financial advice. So, yeah, absolutely, it's a topic that we think is really important.
Sorry, I jumped the gear there. Thanks for the response. Councillor Quayle?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. That bite sting record there, it is a bit of a peak with these wasps all around. Do we hold records of our staff allergies? And because there may be emergency medical situations out in the field. So that's one question. And then secondly, I might have missed this in an earlier meeting, but do we hold defibs both either in our vehicles or in the office, and where are the locations of those, and are they known by staff generally? So there's two questions there, one about allergies and medications, and then about the defibs. Thanks.
Yeah, great questions too, Barry. I mean, that injection, you've got to get there within about 10 minutes, you're right, if you've got a problem with wasps. And the second one, I think, defibrillators again. Where are they? And staff, I'm sure, where are they and how do they access them and etc. Two questions to you, Nick.
Yeah, with the allergies, we certainly do maintain records of staff allergies and other medical conditions that might be relevant for their work. And obviously those staff members that require it do carry EpiPens and similar such medications should they be necessary for them. So that's part of our sort of standard processes. In terms of the defibrillators, we certainly have them in various locations. I couldn't give you them all off the top of my head. I know there's one based in Hamilton, and we also publish the locations of those to staff in the work locations that they can work from. There's also some very good websites, and I might take an action actually just to review this, where you can search up dynamically the location of a defibrillator close to you, wherever you happen to be. And that might be a useful reminder and prompt for people actually to load that application onto their phones, given how mobile our staff are and the many locations they work from.
Just to follow up, Chair, if I may, I just thought it might be useful to have one on the floor that the chamber is on, accessible both to the reception area, but also to the room you're in at the moment. So, because there's more potential for visitors and others and to be involved. So, a question around defibs on this floor. Thanks.
I think personally, Barry, I think it's a great suggestion, and Nick, I think you do an outstanding job, but honestly, I'd expect you to know exactly where that defibrillator is right now. Is it in the kind of entrance hall? Because you've really got just minutes. I don't want to actually go onto a site or find out and that's not there at lunch. I need to know where that defib is, and I think the suggestion for Barry, given the political environment in which we live, I need to know where that bloody defib is. Where it's in the chamber? Is something tickling your fancy?
The reception might be a useful place for it to be, because then it's accessible for reception as well as...
Nick, I couldn't be more serious, and I think it's a great point you've raised, Barry. Nick, if you take that on board, it's like Bunnings have them, that's great. Bunnings, there's a defibrillator at every Bunnings store, and I know that. So I expect that to be the same here, Mr. CEO.
Mr. Chair,
I can't back around, you've got to get it.
Yeah, I also note that we've got somebody who's been known in the media to resuscitate people in aeroplanes and whatever, and so we're always safe being around Councillor Husband as well.
I think it is serious, being raised by you, Barry.
We will find out where the defibrillators are, and we'll and we will let you know. I don't know off the top of my head either.
Well, not good enough. Barry, would you like to? We're going to open for questions. Barry, would you like to move the report? And
very happy to. I move.
Councillor Strange second. Councillor Husband, if you stop giggling, now you get your question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just you raised a good point there. Yeah, that it was interesting on that flight. No one knew first aid, and that's probably a good point. Who on the ground floor is trained in first aid? No?
There's a flip chart on all floors with all
To
the
the
first.
level that they could resuscitate someone.
Yeah, there's we've got a fully trained group of first aid providers. There's a list of each of those people on all the floors that we have and in each of the buildings that we operate from. So that's very easily available.
Okay, and I think the defibs is a good idea. If we could get them
Yeah,
next week.
I agree totally, and I'm pretty convinced there's one seen behind a reception, but I just want to go and check that.
And there's no,
Councillors know where they are too, Nick?
Sorry, I didn't miss.
Could councillors know where they are as well too, please, if that's all right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to affect first aid if you don't actually know where anything is. So,
look,
yeah,
a small point can be actually saving a life. Well done,
Yeah, totally.
well said, Barry.
it
And,
is seconds. Yeah, dead right, Barry. Dead right.
and when you've got an emergency person kind of propping at the mountain, going, hey, get your glasses and read the chart on the floor. It does take time. Okay. It's been moved by Councillor Quayle, seconded by Councillor Strange that the report be received. Once again, thank you, Nick. All those in favour that the report be received, say aye. Those against, carried.
Aye.
Environmental Initiatives funds were in the hands of Kathy? No? Patrick? And Judy. And Judy.
It's Greg and Patrick.
Yeah, okay, Greg. This was run the Reduced Environment Initiative Fund for the round 2022 with 50K. Please present.
Yeah, good afternoon, councillors.
Afternoon, Greg.
This was a report that has been put forward following a request from the probably second to last ICMC meeting, which considered the distribution of EIF funds. Part of that identified some of the challenges with the EIF budget, particularly given the multi-year commitments we have against that particular program. The actual paper to ICMC suggested some adjustments to this year's EIF round. This paper provides councillors with 3 of the options that have been considered by staff in order to accommodate the budgets that we have available, and also makes a recommendation to proceed this year with a reduced but somewhat substantial round to give an opportunity for those community groups to get the funding. So I'm joined by Patrick Whaley, our Manager Biosecurity and Biodiversity, to provide some further background, and
Thanks,
I'll
Patrick.
pass over to Patrick. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Chair. Look, I don't know if I need to provide too much more, but the 3 options that Judy and the team have put forward. The first one is running a fund as normal, with a normal $40,000 limit, with grants up to 3 years, and we've got the pros and cons listed in there, and we think that it's going to put too much of a legacy on future rounds, and basically take too much of a cut out of the budget in the future. The second one is to run the reduced round, which Greg outlined, cap the total amount that we'd give out to $50,000, maximum of 10K per grant, and only for 1 year. Or the third option is just pause the round for 1 financial year and let the reserve build up and do a more substantial one the following financial year. Yeah, and as Greg said, we would like to put forward option 2, which is running a reduced round. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Councillor Newbone?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Look, happy to move option 2, and my reason is I just look, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because if we go without for 12 months, we're clearly going to get more in 12 months' time. But I just think it's not a smart move to just disappear off the radar for 12 months. That's all. Obviously, we've got a much smaller pot that we can fund, but to my mind, we're better off just to keep that awareness out there by running a smaller round for 12 months. That's where I sit.
Happy to second, Barry.
Yeah, it's already been seconded by Councillor McPherson. Thanks, Barry. Okay, further questions, comments? Councillor Story?
Thanks for the report. Just wanted a little bit more clarification on, what's the comment? I'm trying to find it now. Around the review. Far out, I'm trying to find it now. Apologies for that. Where you're saying that if we do the round this year, that it may impact on the review of the collective funds. Sorry, I can't find the paragraph now.
I think it's paragraph 16.
16. Page 93. So it's acknowledged that running a reduced EIF fund or round in 2022 preempts the review of all of Council's grant and scholarship programs, which is currently being led by the Business Advisory Services team with the Finance and Business Services Directorate. What can you expand on that a bit? Like, how much would running this compromise that review or impact on our ability to enact the recommendations that come from the review?
I personally think it's a little, it's not that big a risk. We know what the issues are that the community have with the criteria we've got. It's not huge, so we reviewed it a few years ago, so I think it would be a tweak rather than a wholesale review of the program, but it is going to preempt that review, which is happening at some stage.
And just further, so I don't believe that this would constrain that review or constrain the outcomes of that review. This is working within the, I guess, the budgets that we see as available, and it's a prudent approach. So I've got no concerns about being able to undertake that review as well.
Okay, and the other point of clarification I'd like is in your details under option 3, that last bullet point, you've got high potential for dissatisfaction from some customers, applicants, as many projects are not able to be funded. So that's if we don't hold around at all. Have you already had contact from various potential applicants? Is there a long lineup? So is the number of of those applicants or potential applicants who would be totally dissatisfied if we didn't run one, is it considerable?
I do think there is potential for that dissatisfaction. I mean, I guess we've sort of trained everyone for an annual round. They all know that it's coming, so there will be a number of groups that will be looking to apply for the funding, in constant communication with them.
So, but you don't have a indication of how many people have already put their hand up and said, we'll definitely be putting our application in?
No, and I guess it's acknowledging that, as Patrick said, I think that there's an expectation being set from previous rounds about the scale of funding available, and so it's important that we set those expectations early so that in the event of getting a huge amount of applications through, that we're unable to meet those needs. Because it is a significant effort from community groups to put these applications forward.
Okay, and just wanting to make sure I'm satisfied on my initial question around this review. So what I'm hearing is that the decision, if we were to go with option 2, it's not going to fundamentally compromise our ability to enact any outcomes of the review. But is the review not that substantial? Or is it just that this fund is not of a level that the changes we're considering would have an impact?
I think it's more of a case of what we're putting forward today is working within the criteria that's already established for the fund. The review will take a look at the ways that the fund is used, the criteria, the funding available, how to make it better, how to make it more effective. And that's all about looking forward as opposed to necessarily looking back into this current review round. So there's no concerns that I've identified around taking this approach.
If it helps, Councillor Story, I just wondered if Janine Becker might want to make a comment because it's her team who's looking at doing the review. And I think what you're asking is, what's the scope of that review and how is this likely to intersect with it?
Yeah.
Janine, if you're online, would you like to make a comment?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think for me, there are different elements to this review. And it's probably a continuation on part of the conversation that was started but never completed through the last long-term plan. But a review for me across the whole Natural Heritage Partnerships program and how that is delivering to council strategy or where it may need to be adjusted. But for that to be an input into the next long-term plan rather than any short-term changes. There may be some fine-tuning around the edges in the shorter term, but with a more comprehensive review, checking alignment of the overall program to council strategy to come through the long-term plan.
Okay, thanks for that. That does provide considerable clarification, because my recollection of a number of the conversations we've had around the various funds that we have is a lack of clarity, a lack of understanding, a lack of consistency at times. Community groups are looking for real clear direction, and we're not necessarily finding it. And which that says to me that it needed a very in-depth review in order to deliver what the expectations of our ratepayers are, and in order to get the most outcome for the spend. So I'm pleased to hear that review is still going to go into the depth that's required in that, and that option 2 wouldn't necessarily preclude that review from generating the outcomes that I believe we as a collective were asking for in that review taking place. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Litchfield, thanks for the response, Janine. Fred?
Yeah, look, I want to point out yet again that community groups and the work that they do for our environment and the bang that we get for our buck is a hell of a lot more than we spend on consultants and contractors and every other thing that we do to get the same work done by a huge amount. And again, it's what scraps are left we decide to give to community groups. And this fund is sadly lacking the amount of support this council should be offering community groups. And Arosia, the pest control group on Mount Kariori. The stress and the problems due to not being funded, not being given the money that they asked for initially, and it was modest, going through COVID, losing volunteers, losing support, and now looking at dropping 1080 out of a plane again to try and maintain what they got. We're about ready to release kaka and other birds on the mountain, not me, but they were, all set back because of lack of funding, because we couldn't give it. We gave New Chums Beach, suddenly it appeared, 400,000, we could buy New Chums, a peninsula of land adjacent to New Chums Beach that had an SNA on it that was not going to be developed anyway, we bought. I just, talk about taken for granted and maybe let them wait for 12 months. In my book's not good enough. This fund needs to be topped up and by whatever slush funds this council holds to fully support this fund. Where's all our training budget money go at the end of the day? There's what? $10,000 per councillor per triennium to go in a slush, or is it 3,000? 6,000. Well, there's money. And yet again, we're finding money to do everything else that we consider important. Well, I think community groups and what they're doing to maintain our environment and our biodiversity values is the highest priority, and support communities. Same old thing that I ranted on about earlier. We say we're supporting communities, but we're not doing it anywhere enough. So my option 4, is to top that fund up as quickly as possible and run it to its full capacity and support our community groups and their initiatives. Thank you.
So different view. Thanks, Fred. Kathy?
Yeah, I just have one question, and that is with our small scale community initiatives fund, which has a maximum of, 5,000 that we give. Like, have we got enough, looking at what we normally get in terms of applications for funds from that fund, do we have enough good quality applications, you think, coming through for that lower amount of money to justify this? I mean, I'm actually tentatively in support of what you're suggesting, but I just don't want us to give the money out to groups that we maybe would have actually said no to simply because we've sort of kind of made it available for those lower amounts of, those applications of lower amounts of money. So do you think there are enough applications coming in and that are a good enough quality for us to justify doing this?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Thanks. Finishing the questioning there, Kathy? Have you finished the questioning? Tipper?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did all that impact investing workshops and things like that, social impact or spending impact. By doing this, who do we lose the opportunity? Who does the community lose in terms of opportunity to co-fund? You know, given that no one funds 100% of anybody's anything. And even if we do this for this year, how we're building that framework so other funders in the green space see us as, you know, that we're all hunting together, because there's some freshwater money out there at the moment, but I don't know how community groups would access it. And if it's not partnered up with us as the logical partner, we're partnering up with them and skill sets to attain other funding. Again, I don't want to breed, and again, bad pick, but those projects that are never self-funding, they're not the same as these groups. These groups are going to get together for one great purpose and try and scrape together funding. So I just want to know if this is a one-year thing, what is the long view? If this is an intermediary because of where we are in budget, then how do we go back to impact investing in the next 5-year plan?
I guess we are working in parallel to our own funding with all the other funders to try and get better aligned and making sure that we're all heading in the same direction and supporting the community in a more integrated way. It's not overly organised at the moment, so yes,
one could argue if the work's going to get that little, we don't need a whole FTE for 5 applications. So that FTE should be busy getting community groups funding. I'm just offsetting. Because I don't need a whole person to manage 5 grants, but they could be helping other people get money. So I'm not trying to lose an FTE, trying to advantage us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Patrick, did you want to respond?
Oh no, look, absolutely, we are doing that. We are working very hard with all the other funders to try and line up the playing field.
Sweet as.
Yeah.
Councillor Nicol?
When will the review happen? The review that Janine's leading? When will the review happen? At what time? What month?
Timeline?
Yeah.
Janine, would you like to respond? Timeline, please.
Mr. Chair, as noted, that will be an input into the next long-term plan, so I would expect that work to happen probably towards the end of this calendar year into next year.
All good. Thanks. That wraps up the questions. It's been moved by Councillor Kneebone, seconded by Councillor McPherson. I formally put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. And it's Local Government New Zealand. Chris, where are we on this?
Yeah, Dave, I'm not sure if you're talking to this paper that Neville's going to.
Sorry, Director Williams.
Neville, just as you're going to the other end, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the date actually coincides with the council meeting at the end of July, and we've just received notice that it's going to be online. It's going to be from 9 to 11 in the morning. I'm not too sure if you're aware of that, Neville, so just sort of, we just received that notice.
Yes. Good afternoon, councillors. No, I had been made aware of that by Marley, and I guess they're proposing potentially to move either the meeting our council meeting time or the meeting day, so that we don't have a clash on the 28th. So if you'll be familiar with this process, it happens every year, obviously. It's an AGM, and I'll take the report as read. Attached to the report is guidance from LGNZ in respect to the process that's followed in regard to submitting remits and the timeframes for doing those. So you'll see that the close off for that is 3 p.m. Friday the 20th of May for remits should this council choose to make one. And there's also criteria and guidance in that attachment around what would and wouldn't be considered, or more so what wouldn't be considered as by way of remit, and what the criteria is to bring a remit forward. So that's important for you to consider. You'll also note that in the report itself, it mentions that the delegation for those remit decisions are brought forward to the chair to make a decision on which remits we might submit, should you choose to do so, because we will be outside of a council meeting timeframe to consider any remits you might wish to present. So the report doesn't go into the process about how you might determine if you want to put a remit or what that remit might consist of. It just identifies the timeframe and the process that's recommended should you choose to submit a remit on behalf of this council, or remits. However, as you can see, the recommendations point towards appointing councillors to act as delegates, both as a presiding delegate, a alternate presiding delegate, should something unfortunate happen on the day for the presiding delegate who's unable to attend and carry the voting right, and 2 further delegates. So that means we're looking for 4 representatives from a council and looking for names for those people to be identified today. And the rest of the process is, as I said before, you will be familiar with. And as the Chief Executive noted earlier, it is an online process, and the timeframes in which it's going to be occur in the morning to early afternoon of the date, in front of you on the 28th of July. So happy to take any questions. Otherwise, the process now, as I see it, is about appointments.
Any questions to Director Williams?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, Andrew.
Director Williams, what's our history been with remits?
My recollection is that I don't recall us submitting any in my time here, and that's my recollection.
I mean, the hardy ones, 4-year kind of term, and the other is rebate GST on the rates, but seems to be falling on deaf ears. But that's not what we're worrying about now. It's a person that actually will vote as we put those remits forward, if there are remits. Andrew, you're dead right. Hugh?
Never with a number of councils, territorial authorities looking at withholding their annual subscription and not paying it because the way that local government New Zealand has gone. Is that likely to affect this annual general meeting?
I assume it could be a topic that gets raised for discussion. It might even come forward as a remit, I imagine, but I'm not. Yes, so I'm not familiar with how many are in that category. Are you possibly maybe more aware than I am through your membership of other council-related organisations? But no, are they? Okay. No, so I'm not au fait with who's withdrawn and who's not. But yes, and I guess in answer to your first question, yes, that is likely to have an effect if a significant number aren't paying their fees and aren't able to participate.
Okay, to get the ball rolling, I would think that the presiding delegate should be the chairperson. Don't have to put the name. Chairperson, would that be right? Yes? Then you need a delegate and alternate. Is that right?
Yes.
Who's that going to be?
Just a question.
Sure.
I'm assuming that other remits that come from other councils will no doubt be discussed at the conference as well.
And you vote on them.
It'd be useful to have a connection back into, well, I agree with what you're saying in terms of those positions, but a connection back to those that end up going to the conference to get some feedback on another conference before that. I'm a bit confused as to why they're not all one and the same, but I just got explained as one they're different, but it seems a bit weird to me. But yeah.
I was going to just make that recommendation too. If you're on conference, you're one of these people. Just to save us picking another group of people. And we've already said who's going to.
I think what we do is just move the meeting along. We say chairperson, and then the delegate. Who's the delegate going to be? Deputy chair? Yep, deputy chair. If there's any opposing view, and there's 2 other delegates, is that correct? We've already put hands up to who are going, is that correct?
Yeah. And we've
Although
already
we're
done that.
not going because we're doing it here. Right. Okay, any other volunteers? All good. So Dave, have you got that? It's a chairperson is the presiding delegate, the deputy chair is the alternate, and there are 2 delegates. One is Councillor McPherson and the other is Councillor Nicol. I formally moved by Remington, seconded by Quayle. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Does that do that item? And don't forget, remits can be put to council, and one day we might get one adopted. This is a very serious, the next item's a cracker, and we're running on time, and Mark's just joined us, and Hugh, seriously, you've got the floor to introduce us. It's a cracker, given after Q&A and the misinformation that's been spread around this land on the Te Huia. Absolutely appalling.
The agenda
He was
item-
asked, the Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition was asked, the spending, 3.2 billion he'd cut. What would be the he said, the 100 million that goes in the Te Huia train. That's all he could answer. That's all he could actually nominate. So it's an uppermost of his mind. You get it full, we'll keep the train. That's our role.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of this agenda item here today is merely a technicality. We are making improvements to the services, and we are looking at using the money that we've already got and not changing the rating system at all to allow those to happen. So it's a procedural that we need council's approval to say, yes, keep making the changes and keep using the same money, don't ask us for some more. Mark will run through any technical points on there. Our numbers are up, we're going well. We just want to, yes, carry on and make the improvements is what we're trying to achieve from this item.
Tell us the improvements, Mark.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So this paper, as Councillor Vercoe mentioned, is seeking an update to the funding conditions to those to enable the improvement program that's set out in Figure 1. Just to reaffirm that Council's contribution to Te Huia is fundable from the approved LTP budgets, no additional budgets being sought. The most recent financial update is page 106. Some of the improvements some of the flexibility the group has had, the governance group has had up till now, have enabled a couple of really important changes that have effectively reset the service and enabled us to reset the service post-COVID or post the service shutdowns that we had to run. Around. That enabled us to run through to the Strand in central Auckland, as well as introduce a stop for the Auckland Airport at Puhinui. There are some risks that remain to that improvement program staying on track, which largely relate to Waka Kotahi funding commitment to those additional services. They are the 75.5% funder of the operating costs and 100% of capital. Knowing that Te Huia is always a matter of high public interest, but that we have relaunched with an improved timetable and those additional tweaks from the 24th of January. We have had a pretty clear run since then. We've also had a move to the orange traffic light setting and have had a government-funded 50% reduction in public transport fares. And in response to these things, the service has never been more popular. And this is probably the piece of additional information since the publication of this report. So if I can, Mr. Chair, just ask Jose to provide us a couple of key points on latest service patronage.
I've got Tipper and then Barry, but no, I'm going to ask Jose just now to present because it's so exciting.
For you,
it's
Mr. Chair, good afternoon,
It's a long
everyone.
time between drinks, I'll tell you that.
drum rolls. So since half fair started and also since coronavirus has subsided, we've seen a consistent and actually quite substantive growth in patronage on Te Huia to a point that we've been oversubscribed in quite a few days actually. So the last Friday, we had the busiest weekday. So that's from Monday to Friday since Te Huia launched in the 6th of April 2021. We carried 476 passengers on that day. So that's 119 per train. Also on Saturday, we broke our previous record and we carried a total of 527 passengers on Saturday. We carried 286, I think it was north, to the point that there was about 80 people standing, and they were all quite happy to stand all the way on the train through to Auckland. And then on return, we organized a couch bus service to bring back about 50 people that, you know, they would have had a very long day in Auckland. So we planned a bus journey for them for their return. In April, since the half fares were implemented, we've had a 138% growth on demand if you compare it to March. So that's doubled, more than doubled, the average demand that we're getting on weekdays. And then on Saturdays, we've more than quadrupled the demand since half fares kicked off on the 1st of April. So average demand from 1 to 23rd of April has been 196 for weekdays, and the average demand on Saturdays has been 317. That's up from 82 on weekdays in March and up from 71 in March. I think it's also important to know that to date as well, we're at 80% of what we were last year up to the 23rd of April. So last year we averaged when Te Huia was paused, we had an average of 137 on weekdays, and right now we're about 109. But we were picking up passenger numbers, and we're hopeful that, as per what the report says, that by mid-May we would have recovered to what we're calling our 2021 baseline. So yeah, thanks. Happy to take any questions.
Can't wait. One advantage being the chair, I want to ask this question seriously. That Linda Clark gave me a bit of grief on the radio, and it was national radio, and I was floundering a bit. We have the CEO of the Waikato Chamber of Commerce. He's been kind of begging it in regard to the carbon emission rate. And I don't know the answer to this seriously. If we're getting the numbers of people, do you amortise that over the emission rate, or is it kind of the train? Because it looked as if we weren't really achieving to be serious. And what we're trying to do is have a more efficient carbon footprint by using the train versus a car. So are the numbers helping to make that more attractive? And where do we sit on that? Andrew, just flick that and then.
So our break-even position, so the train pollutes equivalent to 54 vehicles. So if we get more than around 60 passengers, assuming that some of them carpool together in per train, then we'll be more than offsetting the footprint, but then we'll be in a net negative. So I'll give an example. On Friday, we would have reduced the footprint of the corridor by an approximately 1,400 carbon dioxide equivalent units, so kilogram units. So that would have been on a Friday. On Saturday as well, we were, net negative as well. So those are some very good stats, and I'm sure that if we continue on the current growth trend, we will be getting to a position that we should be averaging more than the 55 break-even position per train. Yeah.
Please notify the Leader of the Opposition those facts seriously. He's just so misinformed. Councillor Mahuta, you were the first actually, and you went out. Do you want to speak? No. Right, it's fine. I'll just come with the lights. Councillor Quayle, Councillor Husband, and Councillor McPherson. Barry, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to support this strongly and happy to second, but I think it's very important what Council says around this thing, and words matter. And I'm concerned with, okay, you probably had a lot of reports around Te Huia improvement plan. For me, that doesn't cut it in terms of the public messaging. So I'd like to see our resolution say Te Huia improvement and new services plan, because improvement plan doesn't have, for me, really speak to what we're talking about. So I'd like those words, new services brought in, even though all your reports to date might have had that heading improvement plan. So it might sound small, but in this area of work, it's going to be very important, the message we put out there and what our resolutions say and our messaging and our comms. Thank you for that.
There's nods of approval around the table here. Barry, I know you're online, you can see us. So that's good. It's Councillor Husband.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I'm not.
You want to walk home today?
I'm not going to beg your train. See ya.
God, we ought to see a bit of sport.
Even though it did coincide with the school holidays. So I, on that question, I saw the strangers on the train, on Jamie's tweet on LinkedIn, and the question I got is, Jose, is that just because it's school holidays? Or do you expect that to, I mean, because we know it rises in the school holidays, so, and especially it's free, so, half price, yeah, half price. So do you expect it to continue? And I'll just put a disclaimer out. I don't pay any rates for the train. It's a Hamilton issue, so I've got no vested interest in it. I'm just interested to know. But I do sit on a deck at Taupo and watch an empty train go up and down. So I just wanting to know what do you expect it, because I feel our messaging isn't strong enough around Sleepyhead, Tikofita, and all these new developments. We're not putting a strong enough message that you're going to have thousands of other people wanting to use this train in the future out there. Do you reckon that's a good idea to start messaging that as well? Just so people, because there are a lot of people who watch that train, like we have a watcher of the bus 21 that goes 22 that goes empty from Tiara every day. So
4 times a day.
Yeah. Do you think our messaging, it's sort of in line with what Barry's saying, just getting our messaging a bit stronger in that sort of future area? I'm definitely not detracting the train. I think it's a good idea, but I just want it to last. Yeah.
I've got a suggestion too. I think it's been noted in regard to the wording. We want to make certain it's positive.
Yeah.
So that has been noted, it's due. But occasionally you'll see on television, Specsavers actually have glasses and they actually have an extra pair free. And I suggest you take up the offer.
If you'd rather me do that. But it doesn't look good when it goes past Taupo on a weekday.
Thank you.
On a normal weekday, not a school holiday.
Thank you for your valuable contribution. Andrew?
Thank you, Ross, Chair. A few points. I agree. I think we're probably being a little bit timid in this paper, and I think given this year where we're at in the electoral cycle, this paper has to be 100% correct because it's discoverable. I'm led to believe that there is a skilled surgeon that travels on that train regularly and has decided they can no longer ascribe a time for their surgeries in Auckland because the service is a bit unreliable. So I think to Barry's point, putting services in here is a very good idea because we need to become religious about delivering a time and sticking to the time. We will build our reputation. A group of us every morning, 6 days a week, ride bikes. One of the things we want to do, 8 of us, is take 8 bikes on the train Saturday morning with our partners and ride in Auckland, go to Waiheke, etc., come home on Sunday. Can't take 8 bikes on the train. So my first question was, are you considering a caboose or something to encourage mode shifting once we're in Auckland is the first question. Second question is, I want to go to these numbers because they're not making sense to me. If you look at the first line on 23 on page 107, it's got a number in there of 1.138900 arising from the savings and operating costs. So I go up to the cut and paste above it at 21.22 balance at the end of the year, and it says 1,380,900. So I'm asking myself, where's that 17.5% gone? And it tells me that 490,900, and I go looking for that number. And yes, I see it up there, and 242,600 But it doesn't make sense. Because you say in the cut and paste that the balance at the end of the year should be 1.380,900. In our document here, we say it's 1.138,900. So where did the 17.5% go?
Yeah, response, Mark?
And actually, before you do, Chair, it doesn't really matter, but here's the thing. You get a bunch of numbers people looking at this, they want excuses to bag this project. So every time we've got a public-facing document, we have to be right. It's a small amount of money, but these papers have to be correct because they're in the public arena.
Absolutely. So if I can, Mr. Chair, there are kind of two questions there. One's around the carriage configuration options, I think, in relation to the recreational trips. And the second is in relation to that particular figure that you mentioned. If I can ask Jose to respond to that, that would be wonderful.
So is it the caboose you're going to answer first, or is it the sums of money?
Why don't you come up here?
So, through the chair, paragraph 23 should say, as of June 2022 is 1.380 instead of 900. So then if you sum up what it's outlined in point A and point B, it adds up to a total. So there is an error. The balance of the reserves as of June 2021 was 1.138 million. So there is an error in the report.
Okay, that's the first question. The second was the caboose to put on extra bikes.
So in terms of increasing the capacity to carry bikes on board, I'm happy to take an action away and talk to Kirill to see what we can do. In terms of the configuration of the carriages, i.e. the length of the train, contractually, we've agreed with Kirill that we can go up to 6 carriages to operate trains if demand justifies it. However, we do have a constraint, which is the number of carriages that we have access to. We only have 12. So currently we've got a lot of flexibility because we're only operating 1 train every day from Monday to Friday with 4 units on that train. So we can actually couple more carriages if demand justifies it. But if we increase the service frequency, then more trains will be utilized, thus reducing the number of carriages that we have to be able to...
That wasn't quite the question. We want to get the capacity to have extra bikes.
Yep, so I'm happy to take an action away and look at that.
Okay, Hugh, is there any action planned for bikes? Extra? There is.
We've looked at putting bikes on there. The trouble that we've got is that everybody with a good idea is saying, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? Why don't you stop at Pocono? Why don't you take bikes? And all these sort of variations that, yes, you can do, but you've got to come back to the original intention of running the train was a commuter train from Hamilton into central Auckland as quickly as possible. That was the philosophy that we were trying to achieve. The moment you start stopping at all the little stations on the way, you are therefore adding serious time to your journey, in which case you're no longer competitive with what you're trying to do. There is no problem with stopping at the smaller stations at the 2 train trips coming back in the morning and up in the afternoon. You can take your time on those, but concentrate on what it is you're trying to do. Also look at it when we're looking at can we get on Sundays? And the answer is it is difficult to get on Sundays at the moment because it's a block of line from Kiwi Rail. They're working on the tracks and they won't let any trains through. And they've told us you can't bring your train through there. Saturdays is a different story and we can get a train up there on Saturdays. So we're working to achieve all these things. How many people are going to want a bike on there? I take your comment. There are 6 people wanting to take 6 bikes and go once in 6 months. Is that something that we should respond and say, yes, we need to do it because there'll be 6 more people coming in behind? It's something we've talked about and we've said, how can we bring this extra service on? But again, we are concentrating at this stage on achieving the outcome that we originally set out to do. So it's being looked at, but not as the highest priority in the world.
Yeah, Chair, through you.
Yep, Andrew.
Those are really valid points, and I absolutely acknowledge that this is a services paper. We had a meeting earlier this week where Barry Quayle raised the matter of the Internet of Things, service improvement, business intelligence, and he said to the chief executive, I want you to think about how we can adopt new technologies. This is a services type paper and a services type agreement, and I'm just sort of putting out there some suggestions. My last question was of a technical nature. How did the electric train protection system win the race over ETC? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, sort of. So if I interpret your question correctly, you want to know how electric train protection will improve the reliability of Te Huia, or?
No, we were told that ETC was going to be the answer to the Maiden's Prayer. Now it's lost the race to ETP, and I just wonder how that happened. Did we get it wrong to start with, or have you done some research?
So we contracted a rail specialist last year that had done a lot of work back in the days with electric train protection equipment, and that ETP equipment used to be operational in the Auckland network up until 2014. That was an idea that he came up with and proposed to Keyworld and to the Regional Council that was going to be at a better value for money and more affordable and actually fit for purpose for Te Huia to reutilize the ETP equipment that was still resident in some of the old units that used to operate in Auckland, and to repurpose them for Te Huia, and they will achieve the level of protection that we require in the Auckland network and also in the Waikato sort of portion of the rail network that ETCS was going to provide. So in a way, it's sort of substituted the level of protection that we will need and the level of flexibility that will give us to be able to provide reliable services.
Thank you. That's it. Thanks, Chief.
I've got Councillor Strange and Councillor Nicol, but I just have to ask you this question, not let it go unchallenged. While you've got the specialists saying it's kind of unreliable, I'm leading the witness, but I thought we're up to like 97% reliability on time. Have I got that wrong? What's reliability on time? Because Councillor McPherson, his friends have made these allegations. They've got appointments, medical people, and they just can't wait for the half hour for the operation.
So Te Huia has a number of performance targets associated with it. On-time performance, as with any PT service, is one, and we've been exceeding the on-time performance target, which is 95%. There is another target which relates to service reliability, and there have been some disruptions to services, in particular over April. Some of these, they relate to a whole range of a range of things that aren't directly related, but do go back to some of the base infrastructure that we're operating on, which hasn't been used for passenger services for quite some time.
Okay. Okay, and travel time, may I ask before Angela, what is the travel time between the base and the Strand? What's the average travel time?
2 hours and 18 minutes.
And a vehicle, I know you're going to say the time of the day, but there's actually a formula. And what is that formula? Is it comparable the time? Do you want me to answer the question for you?
Yeah.
Okay. It's comparable. Councillor Strange. I'm standing the witness down.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark and Jose, for the report and presentation. Just wanted to add, we haven't had an easy ride since launching. Anecdotally, I know of people moving to Hamilton in order to still be able to work in Auckland. And just on Hugh's point that it was launched as a commuter service, but in line with that also we know that the nature of work has also changed, and people are a lot more flexible, and so we need to be nimble as well and change those demands. So by us offering 3 return trips on a weekday, we give people options. It is a fairly long day if you travel regularly. So by providing, off-peak services, it means you can come home a little bit earlier. Also on Saturdays, the demand has always been really strong.
And by only offering 2 services, you know, you can't respond to that oversubscription. You know, you go up with 4 or 5 carriages, you come back with that number as well. So by eventually increasing that amount on Saturdays, which is also in the plan and within budget, you know, you can spread that demand across those return, well, the extra trips. Yeah, what Jose was saying on the weekend happened with a lot of people wanting to ride on it and us putting on replacement bus services. A lot of disappointed people because wanted to take the train there and back. Yeah, if they wanted to drive, they would have driven. But I totally understand that is with, you know, was out of our control. But yeah, really excited with the way that this is heading. Yeah, and in my mind, ideally, you know, a 6-day or a 7-day timetable that remains the same each day, regardless if it's a weekend, would really grow the service. But again, it's chicken and the egg, funding, patronage. If you fund it more, you put on more services, then your patronage will grow. So yeah, it'd be cool. Just one question, Mark. It said in the report we're waiting on Waka Kotahi and the FAR funding. Have we had anything back from them to date?
No. So the board met on the 21st. We're waiting for some correspondence, which we understand to be coming, winging its way or worming its way through Waka Kotahi, which will make its way back to us hopefully next week. Sometimes that communication can take a little bit of time. And that will, I guess, set out, we hope, give us an answer to the question of whether, and if not when, they may be in a position to fund their 75.5% share of the 6 services, and then we know that we will need to go through that same process again for the weekend services as well.
Great.
So we're just waiting for that letter.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chair.
And, thanks, Hugh, and thanks, Angela, for the great kind of efforts you make in this exciting project. I've got Councillor Nicol and then Councillor Litchwick. Councillor Nicol, light off.
Thank you. Having read the hundreds and hundreds of submissions for the long-term plan of what people want, I think that these improvements will be right on the money in regards to making this what the next step of what it can come, knowing as well that there'll be future steps, of course, and hence my question was around, I heard Councillor Strange talking about it a week or 2 ago. Mark, are you able to comment on future electrification thoughts that are out there?
So there is a
People ask.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, there is a little bit of electrification happening on the network that we'll be utilising already or proposed. It's actually just about to get underway, which is between Papakuta to Pukekohe.
Good.
Auckland Council, Auckland Transport are also doing a piece of work that relates to the future requirements of the metro network. The geographic scope of that actually extends to as far south as Pocono. I think it wouldn't be too far a cry to consider that, well, we would expect that electrification of that part of the network to also be considered as part of that, which actually leaves an even shorter hop in the non-electrified part of the network from Hamilton to Pocono. So there are those things happening. There's also a Ministry of Transport led business case into intercity connectivity between Hamilton and Auckland, as well as electrification. That'll consider some other things associated with particular components of the route, which will enable the services to be much faster than they are now, getting the journey time well under the 2-hour mark, I think down to closer to 1 hour, which will be a game changer as well.
Thank you. In particular, because of course it opens up the possibilities of going into Britomart and into Hamilton City one day, if that should be developed that way. So can see that's great to hear. Thank you.
You'll never get into Britomart though, will you, Mark?
Councillor Litchwick.
When can I book a ticket?
Right now.
We can book tickets. No, not good enough. When can I
Thanks,
look at
Jennifer. Look, just finally, councillors, in all seriousness, I mean, I think it's an exciting project. I think we've had people like Mike Garrett, we've had our former CEO, and Chris is so enthusiastic, and staff and councillors. I mean, you know, if this was pulled, where does it go? Offshore, no. South Island, no. It's here, it's a start, and it is a renaissance of rail. And seriously, you've got to use it to enjoy it. It's like running on a rubber tyres. Don't forget, it's got, I think, Angela, it's the IT is working all the way to a high standard, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep, the answer is yes. And would the electrification picking up at Pukeko, would that lower the carbon footprint? As a Pope Catholic? No.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Okay. So no, it's a good start. It's all heading in the right way. And so look, Minister Twyford really went the extra mile to put this $96 million up. I think we've got an extremely, politics aside, supportive, enthusiastic Minister of Transport, Minister Michael Wood. We've got to do our part. Hamilton City's got to do its part, and Waikato District Council, and they are working together on it. And when you look at that big transport hub that Andrew King was responsible for, credit to him, and also at Huntly as well. Hugh, when you look at, Stu, you look at Tika Whata, I mean, it's only 7-8 minutes, and there's good parking facilities there. If you want to stop at every hamlet, you will ruin that service. I can promise you that. London to Brighton, it was 1967. I'm guessing that's nearly 60 years ago. To this day, it's still 60 miles, 60 minutes. Guildford, Leatherhead, all those towns have offered millions of dollars for that train to stop. Please, let one of the trains, but not the peak use, keep that train going, because you will end up by suffering, because you'll get lambasted in regard to the time it takes. They overshoot the station, got to back up, then a freight train comes through. Our rail network is still shocking in this country. It's really horse and carriage stuff when you look at it. But that Te Huia, I think we can all be proud of it, led by this council and particularly these two people. Do you want to make a few comments?
Mr. Chair, just wanting to...
Something got... I'm sorry, my friend is carrying on a bit today.
Just wanted to acknowledge a team, a very small team on a very big project who've got to deal with a lot of complexity and to trying to get the whole system to work. And I think being able to contemplate putting these new services and improvements in place in the timely way we have, I just want to acknowledge the staff and what they do. The second thing I wanted to do is I just wanted to acknowledge what you just said with Minister Wood. You know, we quizzed him recently, and how serious is he in keeping that Ministry of Transport business case? Is it still going? Because we haven't heard much about it. He said we're still working on it. It's still the intention to look at a business case to put on faster rail to Auckland and electrification. So as long as they hold to that, we could see some great positivity going forward.
Jose, you go the extra mile on this, just like our CEO said. Closely with Auckland Transport. They're not the easiest to deal with, but you've developed a really good rapport with them, because one train occasionally coming through the network when they've got masses of trains moving 2 million people a year, you work well with them, and Mark, credit to you too. It's been moved, it's been seconded, the report be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. The schedule here says we stop for afternoon tea. Do you want to, or do you want to continue to move on? I think we continue to move on. Next item is that a public transport business improvement review. And Mark. Page 117 on your agendas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't repeat the content of the report or its recommendations. I do believe, though, that the 5 actions that are set out in the strategy represent meaningful steps to improve our public transport business model. This model is characterised by unnecessarily complex funding and decision-making arrangements that inhibit our ability to design and deliver the public transport system that the region needs. Changing these arrangements will take some time, and it requires building on some already strong collaborative relationships we have where we have them, such as with the Hamilton City Council through the Regional Connections Committee and with future-proof partners, and forging new ones centred on the renewed relevance of public transport where we don't, such as in many of our rural communities. With your approval of this strategy, the next steps will be to commence more detailed implementation planning. Completing these actions in time for the 2024 LTP is ambitious, but I believe it's achievable with the resources we have available. That's my introduction. Happy to answer questions on the report, Mr. Chair.
Andrew, I mean, it's quite exciting stuff what you proposed here. It's a first step in quite a transformational way in which we'll manage public transport. Andrew and then Angela.
Mark, my first question relates to system governance, paragraph 25. I wonder if you could just read that carefully and tell me why in there we'll talk about interdependence and interference. How does that, I read that paragraph several times and it doesn't make sense. That's the first question, Chair. The second question is, I'm a big fan of strategic interventions, that's for sure, but my question under Action 4 is, in what way are we currently not proactive?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, the second in paragraph 25, interference, should read interdependence. Apologies, that's a typo. I hope it otherwise makes sense with that clarification, but in particular within the metropolitan areas and the Hamilton to Auckland corridor, the interdependence of the partners within that across territorial boundaries, across the Transport Agency and the Regional Council, we are highly interdependent with respect to achieving transport outcomes in general and also public transport outcomes. Sorry, if you could repeat the second question, Mr. Councillor.
The frustration with these last two papers is we're going into an election and that train is going to get attacked and we're going to be in the hustings protecting the train. I'm a big fan of the train. Anything we have in the public domain in terms of documents and numbers has to be right. So, Chris, as I said to you in the bowels of this building this morning, these two papers, we haven't covered ourselves in glory, and I don't know if we can change them, but the errors in the numbers and the spelling need to be taken out of them before they do us any harm. My second question was, in what way...
Andrew, if you just pull that mic toward you, because you're hardly audible. You're talking, I'm sorry, into the screen. Sorry.
Fair comment.
Yep.
On page 118, it says we're moving to a proactive footing in public transport and integrated transport and land use planning. My question is, in what way are we currently not being proactive?
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, very important point. So our current model for, in particular, public transport network planning and the resourcing of that is that we have, in effect, an administration or overhead cost that's loaded on top of the raw cost of contracting the services. And it's that premium that enables us to do our planning work, in particular with public transport network planning. This means that where you already have services of a high value, you have more resources available for proactive planning of the network. In places where we don't currently have a high level of service, such as in many of our rural communities, there's not the same level of resourcing available for that proactive planning. So what's been signalled here is for us to effectively revisit that. There are other funding avenues available through the Transport Agency, which would make us less dependent on that service charge for that proactive planning.
That's a great answer, Chair. Thank you.
Page 132 had a little bit more unpacking of that.
Councillor Teague.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a question. I know there's a couple of 3 days to go on the consultation, but is there any indication of what level of submissions have come in on the annual plan review relating to public transport in the eastern part of the region? And then I have another comment to make. Thanks.
Chris, got the question? Sorry.
Yeah, yes, through you, Mr. Chair. We have received an initial cut of some submissions received. There's well over 100, I understand. And there are the vast majority of them supportive of the proposal in the annual plan in general. There were, I understand, a minority of those who are supportive of the change in rating approach for those eastern districts, supportive of the Regional Council funding 100% of those services from rates. So you might recall there were 3 questions that were a part of the consultation. Councillor Teague, I hope that answers the question.
And no doubt more flow in the last few days as they normally do. So my second part of this was a comment, and I suppose I'm considering that this review, might be, coming through by 2024. And just in the last few days, there's been some news of completely new transport technology. And I suppose the question around that is this review going to be flexible enough to cope with a totally new transport technology? And what I'm referring to is this announcement that a local consortium has put in an order for a whole bunch, I think 25 initially, of these sea gliders. They've given some costings of what they would cost in terms of fares. For example, Auckland to Whangarei would be a 30-minute trip and would cost $30. And it's about the same distance, for example, to Whitianga. And down to the southern part of the Firth, probably only 20 minutes and $20. And maybe on the west coast, if it was feasible, Raglan into the Onehunga Harbour would be something similar. And these vehicles are a sort of a hybrid of, they have a hull and then they have foils. So when they get up to speed, they foil and then they finally take off and they fly at about 10 metres above the ocean. And this new technology is expected to be here by 2025. And so while this is at the moment a commercial operation, you could think of it in terms of public transport as a ferry, and something that Regional Council and/or central government could be involved in. So, I think these are really exciting prospects. This is fully electric, very quiet, able to, skim across the ocean at, sort of 10 metres above the surface. So just an exciting new development, and I think we just have to be open to this sort of new development in terms of our planning for public transport. Thanks.
Yeah, no, good comments too, and it's constantly changing. And next time you're in Wellington, take that ride from Eastbourne on that electric ferry, and it's not a dream, it's a reality, it's operating now. And I see that Auckland are following suit with electric ferries. I know you're talking about different mode of transport, but the changes are coming quite rapidly. Councillor Strange?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to that this funding, this review is bigger than just buses. It's also our community transport. It's our total mobility as well as our buses and trains as well. So when it went through my committee earlier this month, it was endorsed unanimously, and people are excited by it around the region. I think they're excited that potentially PT could go on our rates instead of theirs, which is fine. But I'm really excited by those efficiency gains that we'll get through our staffing. I know a number of the smaller councils as well struggle to find staff who are specialised in PT, and just the way that it's currently funded and rolled out is quite laggy. Often by the time territorial authorities signal to us that they want a new service and the backwards and forwards and the funding is secured, could be at least a year, sometimes more. So this way, this whole boundaryless planning moving forward will make things way more efficient, and our communities will really benefit from that as well. So pleased that it was supported, and look forward to the decision today.
The proposal was quite, just councillors, I don't want to say, you know, in the future, say, oh, we didn't know anything about it. This is quite a major step, what you're proposing here today. So we've really got a big set. We know what we're about to sign up to. So I'm a fan of Auckland Transport. I think that the arm's length, and for myself, I felt like that would have been a good model for water. But I really feel that Auckland Transport is a model. It's worked, and they've really been hit under the pump, of course, because their patronage has been down 60% or more. So but what the not downside, when you see these parking taken from Auckland streets, taken from Queen Street, taken from Newmarket, the pollies get the blame, but in actual fact, at Auckland Transport are swinging the changes, and yet they are not directly accountable at the coalface for these massive changes that Auckland is seeing. So you do give away a fair bit of your perhaps direct influence and independence. So that's the way I see it. Anyway, Nicola, I'm sorry. Anyway, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you. Couldn't be more supportive of the strategy and the project. Need obviously that agility as Councillor Strange talked about, and being a representative of Hamilton and knowing their emissions are the majority of their pie chart, I can see that's only going to be so helpful to bring the surrounding areas together in that way. I'm just wanting to make a comment, because I'm very grateful to have been part of some of the workshops for the Regional Public Transport Plan, and there are some really exciting things being talked about in there. When I was just flicking, and this is not a major thing, I just thought I'd mention it though. As I was flicking through the actual document attached to this, I noticed there was an image on page 131 of figure 5 of the commuter catchment. And I thought it was a really good image, but keeping in mind the other discussions we've been having in the public transport space recently, and Angela's comments around the fact that the nature of work is changing as well, it just felt like that image there was a perpetuation of the thinking that we've had in the public transport space around it being for commuters. And I think we're going in a direction that I can tell where we're more catering to achieve a goal such as people being able to live without a car, without having to own a car, to help with that cost of living. And those are often also then going to be the person in the household who might not be working as much, say they've got children to look after, or for people with disabilities, or people who are elderly, or people who just don't work in the traditional ways anymore. So I just wanted to be mindful of the messages we send as to whether we're telling old narratives or new narratives for all of the people that read these documents, which might be transport engineers and various councils. But that's just my 2 cents, and yeah, really, really supportive.
Great, that's good positive feedback. I'd like to with pleasure second that, Dave. I'm formally going to put it if there's no further questions or comments. I'm sorry, Kathy.
Just one very quick question, and that was just on page 146. Can you just explain the table there which has Taupo District Council? I'm just looking at the funding by local authorities, and most of them have actually increased the local funding for the 21-22 year, but Taupo District Councils is halved. Am I just reading that poorly? Can you explain it for me?
Sorry, I don't actually have the long form report in front of me.
Right.
But I'm happy to talk you through that after. What happens in particular with territorial authority funding is that it's very, very lumpy, in particular because a very significant proportion of it is infrastructure related rather than services.
Right.
But I'm happy to talk you through that.
Is that right, Kathy?
146. Oh, yeah. It's just because because the Taupo District Council one is virtually halved from 206,000 to 110,000. I just wondered.
I'll undertake to clarify that for you. We have updated these numbers in the report on the basis of some feedback that we received from TAs, but I'll undertake to update that
If
with
you could,
you
because it's quite
directly.
a significant difference compared with the others. I'd just like to understand that. Thanks.
It's your territory. Councillors, I mean, this strategy is going to go on your rates. So people say when they open their rate bill, oh, yeah, the increase in rates. The TLAs won't thank you, but it's the right thing to do in my opinion, but it will affect the rates as far as the perception is concerned. People are paying the same rate, but they won't see it that way because it's on our rate demand. I'm now formally going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. If there's any objection, say so, but I just propose that we just stop just for 5 minutes for a cup of coffee, because we've still got a bit to cover. We've got Lake Taupo protection. That's going to take a good 20 minutes. Bit of debate on that, and then we're going to publicly excluded. So the meeting stands adjourned just for 10 minutes. It is 2:50 p.m, Dave, and the reconvened meeting is now open. Our CEO would like to make a statement in regard to public transport section. I mean, it's a standing committee. It's only been going now for 2.5 years. It's groundbreaking, and all the stars came together, you know, i.e. we had a central government that's pro-public transport, and we've certainly worked well with them and with a whole new young team. I think we're making great progress, and certainly one of your KPIs, Mr. CEO, and it's over to you if you'd like to make some comments.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to acknowledge the work that probably started off with Janine and what Mark's carried on in his new director role with respect to getting that business improvement review done and actually getting a strategy past you today. I actually thought that was going to be one of the ones that would be a real stretch to get done. Small team, working at absolute pace, in difficult times, you know, when trying to procure someone who could even do the review in the first place. So I just wanted to take the opportunity in front of you just to acknowledge Mark and his team for what they've done, and Janine, who was initially involved in getting it underway, because it's quite a milestone day, really, with the decision made today. Thanks.
And Mike Garrett before that. The item on the agenda now is that the Lake Taupo Protection Project draft project review. Question I have as chair to you, Chris, how many times do we have to relitigate this? Is it not the answer that some people want, or am I being a bit hard making those comments?
I'm going to refer your comment through to Director Williams, because I haven't been involved in the committees and what happens behind the scenes.
A brilliant response, Mr. CEO. Director Williams.
Thank you, Chair Russ. So yeah, this is a perennial issue that keeps raising its head, but not unexpected in this particular case, given that when we went out for consultation in the annual plan process in conjunction with Taupo District Council, the findings, and you'll see the options that are in the report, the option that we ended up landing was that we would undertake a review again of the trust by the end of June 2023. What we've just determined is that we would like to bring the review forward and conclude it before the next elections in October. And we think that's a fitting thing to do. And obviously in that determination through the long-term plan, it was an independent review. And at the time we were thinking of using Audit New Zealand, but our understanding is Audit New Zealand are really under the pump and don't have the capacity to do that review. So in discussions with the Joint Committee, who have helped guide this process, and to be frank, I'd just like to acknowledge Marley's work in this. She's held the pen on this over recent times, and it has been difficult because the Joint Committee's been unable to formally meet for 2 consecutive meetings for want of a quorum. And so getting this particular recommendation in front of you today, and it went to Taupo District Council yesterday, who ratified it, has been quite challenging, given we haven't gone through a formal committee process. It has ended up being done by way of a workshop. But ultimately the outcome of that process is that we're recommending the independent review be presented to 3 parties, KPMG, PwC and BDO New Zealand, for their consideration and presentation to the officials working group. Still to be confirmed the establishment of that group, but the officials working group will include membership from the Crown, from Taupo District Council and from WRC. It doesn't include the trust. The trust has identified that they would have a conflict of interest to be involved in that process, that we would manage that tender process, I suppose, for want of a better word. Upon receipt of the responses, should we be lucky enough to receive 3 responses back or 3 proposals back, then the officials working group would determine which agency would be the best to undertake the review on our behalf. You'll see attached as an appendice a fairly substantial briefing paper to go out with that proposal to those 3 agencies. And I think it provides a really good summary of the history of the project and the timeline and the events that have occurred. And noting that in 2018 the Crown funding ceased, and that they've been operating since 2019 as a trust off the residual savings that had accrued from the 80 million initial funding received. So, we are aware that there's some split views between Taupo District and our council around maintaining the trust into the future. In discussions with Taupo District Council about confirming the terms of reference for the review, you will note included in there that one of those areas we want the reviewers to look at is what potential other options might exist for the trust. Not saying to continue the work that they are currently doing, unless that becomes the response from the reviewing agency, but more around what other options may be there for them that they might want to consider in their own right. Now, that was a bit of a point of contention with us in Taupo District, but we felt that it was okay to leave that in there within the review criteria because it helped us to move on and get agreement on the remainder of the review elements. So I guess, that is the broader context of what we're proposing today. In answer to your question about why are we doing this again, it's because we said we would. We're hopeful it's the last time. Should that not be the case, then we are stuck in another review process at some point down the track. But we have to roll the dice, I find, for kind of a better word, and allow the review to be undertaken and then live with whatever the recommendations are. However, in saying that, all three parties, the settlers, must support the recommendation that the reviewers make. So if any one of the three parties has a completely different view or is unable to support that, then that recommendation would fail. And the next stage would have to be another review. So I just wanted to clarify that because that is one of the requirements that all three parties must agree on the future state post this next round. Also subject to that review outcome will be a determination around the governance of the project. So currently we have a joint committee, which we understand that's been established. That potentially may not be the structure that remains post this arrangement. Look, I'll take the report as read. Hopefully my clarifying remarks have been useful and happy to take questions.
By speaking order, I've got Councillor Kneebone and then Councillor Quayle, but before so I'm going to ask the constituent Councillor White to make any comment.
No, sorry. Oh, thank you. I wasn't at this particular meeting. I turned up to the previous meeting, but we didn't have a quorum, so an extraordinary meeting had to be held. And I think it was Katarina was there. Was she? Yes. So I can't actually tell you too much specifically about this meeting, but I think what Neville has told you is correct. I think the only other things that were the other thing that has changed is that originally the officials working group was just the settlers, I believe, and Tū Wharetoa have been added to that group. I think that was done at the last meeting when I wasn't there. Is there anything that you need to tell us? The only thing I guess I just wanted to say was that I think it is really important that this audit is independent. We had some issues, we had some concerns around the last one because of the involvement of the trust in the officials working group review. So I just wondered whether Neville can actually confirm for us how we're going to make sure that that this review that's done is as independent as possible and that nobody overly influences anything. Thanks.
Councillor Williams, independence for independence regardless of who pays for the report.
I don't know if that's a promotion.
Look, Councillor White's correct. Tū Wharetoa Trust Board have been added as a working party member, and that was at their request, if I recall rightly, and there was no concerns raised by any of the joint committee members about supporting that recommendation. The role of the officials working party is more administrative than it was in the past. So if you may recall, some of you, that from the previous review, there was a lot of fingerprints from the officials working party all over that review process. And in terms of the costing, sizings and all sorts of other work that went on. So I think that was recognised to some degree by this council, and hence why we asked for the review to be conducted independently. And so we have to have faith in that process, that out of the three identified potential providers of the service, that they will undertake it in a professional and independent fashion, that they have their own reputations, and there are obviously large concerns of a lot of, a lot of experience behind them, who would not want to sully that with undertaking anything inappropriate. Ultimately, the decision from the recommendations is the officials, the settlers, and so that'll have to be a forum that we convene separately for all three parties to come together and determine. That will exclude Tū Whareatoa Trust Board, obviously, as they are not a settler agency.
Okay. It's Councillor Kneebone, Councillor Quayle, Councillor Mahuta, Councillor McPherson. Stu, you've got the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I wanted to move the recommendations, please, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Councillor Kneebone.
And
seconded by Councillor White. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for the good work you've done on this, Neville. I know it's been pretty challenging at times. I'm confident in the process we've got here, and note that yourself, Russ and Mac and I and the Taupo Mayor and two of their councillors all agreed to this review, and it's good we've got it a wee bit earlier. So I would have thought it would have looked pretty awkward on their part if they don't accept the recommendations from it, given the professionalism of the three options for the reviewers. So yeah, happy to move. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, and your work on this matter is as well. Councillor Quayle?
Yeah, just wanted to make sure from the Director Williams that the terms of reference are going to be absolute key, because that's going to be the instrument by which those three entities are going to respond. So is he happy that those terms of reference are wide enough scope that don't confine a particular outcome? Thanks.
Good question.
I am happy. Obviously, the review brief will form the backbone of the terms of reference, so it won't be varied in any great way, shape or form. And specifically in regard to the scope, and unless somebody has a specific concern about scope, either not enough or too wide, then now's the opportunity to raise that. It has been through a fairly robust process to get to where we are today, and been well tested, and certainly incorporates the views of the Crown and Taupo District and WRC as well. But this council has the opportunity if it wishes. You also note the milestones and the deliverable dates. So we're aiming for quite a truncated process, really, to get the job done by the end of September, so that we can make a determination as prior to the election. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barry. Councillor Mahuta.
And just in support of that, thank you for all the work done to date. But I just note in my term as council, this relationship has been somewhat under review. So, Kathy, I think you'd agree, this lease number for third go round for us. So just to support that, I just want to say that in my other roles, commissioning work right now is steep, even of the big three. So does this provide you enough of a frame that someone with that requisite skill, who may be retired or in another position right now, because if you can get someone from those, awesome in this next short while, but they're giving away audits and things like that, just in the rest of the world. I just want to know that if one of those three firms can't do it in this time frame that's counted, what else have we got? Just say in terms of, or you're confident?
Yeah, so we don't have a plan B around this at this stage. We would have to go back to the joint committee and the three settler agencies and reconfirm other options. So we've deliberately
narrowing it down
kept
to the three, if they don't have someone suitably qualified to do it or available right now. That's my biggest fear, is that you have to go back around the Maori bush.
That potentially could be an unintended consequence of focusing on the three that we have, but we needed to be able to give certainty to all three settlers that these were the agencies we were approaching, and that there was confidence in their capability. The capacity issue is yet to be tested.
And then there's my other thing. Earlier in the piece, when the arrangements for Lake Taupo were starting to settle, we did raise with, what are they called? Who does settlements? Sorry. Officer Treaty Settlements and Te Arawhiti, that in Taupo, the layers of the different timings of things was going to be really evident. We're going to have a very noisy governance schedule for the lake. Te whare toa, te kotaitanga, all the ones listed in the report. What is the Crown's obligation to seek efficiency and support this? And why are we paying for it? Because they rejected that advice when we gave it to them 6 to 7 years ago and left us with a problem of the smallest entity in the arrangements trying to retrofit itself to fit the arrangements.
Yes.
So I still think somehow we've got to write a letter up that way, make them a little bit very responsible.
Agree.
Don't know if the trust has done any of that.
No, those are really valid points, and I was party to those conversations 6-7 years ago, and we tried to advocate for the Crown to rationalise the number of entities in the catchment, and you'll see them all listed there from page probably 247. There's 3 pages of them. Now, all of those entities are all guarding and protecting the same thing, and the Crown has demonstrated through that process when it moved forward, and you'll recall that they brought Te Kotahitanga actually into the chamber unexpectedly, because they had a sense that we were going to prolong our commitment to that deed of settlement. So they brought them up to try and sort of put a bit of pressure on us to move forward with our support for the deed of settlement. Now, that was never a point of contention from our perspective, I believe, but it was certainly one we wanted to draw the Crown's attention to in respect to rationalisation and reducing some of those inefficiencies and costs. And that did form a submission that was made, but to all intents and purposes, the Crown wanted to land that deed of settlement and then walk away. And that's still the sense I get about their position.
Okay, Councillor Mahuta. Councillor McPherson, then Councillor White.
So, Director Williams, when you talk in paragraph 19 about the project, I want to be really clear I understand what that means. That is the project that took $80-odd million, move it up 170 tonnes of nitrogen, set up 27 or sub 50 nitrogen discharge agreements, and has allowed a cap and trade situation. That's all we're talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. So the project agreement, yes, is the parent.
Okay. So I didn't want to be commenting on something that I was misunderstanding. In the draft for the review, will we ask the reviewers to consider the aspirations of the founding trustees? Because I think at the time the founding trustees were pretty clear about their aspirations in terms of a lifespan. That's my first question.
We can make that absolutely crystal clear, because the expectation is that all parties have an opportunity to have their views discussed and considered by the reviewers. So by that I mean the settlers.
I don't know how many of the original trustees are still with us, but if, there needs to be some way of canvassing their views at the time, and I'm sure there's
I understand.
Rich record. Second question is, will the review be cognizant of our stated position on the funding of this trust in its current form? Because we've been really clear.
Yes, so it will be explicit in terms of what we determined as an outcome of the last consultation process, that we were only prepared to fund 50% of the lowest cost option, and that's where we are. Our position at this stage, as you know, we're not funding at all, because of the condition was explicit that they come and work out of our facility, and they didn't. And a big part of the contribution we were making was around kind and offer of services and provision of accommodation. So they're not utilising that, and they're okay with that, so that they can maintain their independent position. So there's no reason why we would move from that.
My final question is, you answered my first question around what the project was. Our obligations as the stakeholders at the moment are to make sure that those NDAs are protected and are in an environment where they can still be traded into perpetuity. Is that correct?
That is correct. None of the obligations we have entered into up until this point can be foregone. So even post all of this, we still have an obligation as the as an agency, one a member of the overall body, to maintain the accountabilities associated with the arrangement previously put in place. So it's contractual. Does that make sense?
So therefore, Chair, I think it's really important that we express the view that value for money, those 27 or sub-50 agreements can be traded very cost efficiently. And I'm hoping that when it comes our turn to korero with whoever the reviewers are, we can have a discussion around this isn't all, because to me as a newbie, or a backbencher, I think the term is, it strikes me that this is a group of people in a project looking for a job to do. And I don't want to support any of that sort of, I don't want any spotlight, any sunlight to get through an opportunity for this group to go away and say, we'll do the nitrogen discharge agreements. Oh, and by the way, we're going to go and be bigger than Ben-Hur for the rest of the lake. That would be absolute failure in my humble opinion. We've only got one obligation, I think.
Yes.
Make sure that 170 tonnes of nitrogen stays out of the lake.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor White?
I just wanted to make a couple of things clear, but also just to ask one other question of Neville, following on from what Andrew just said. So Audit New Zealand was approached about doing this, but they weren't available to do they weren't available to do it at this time. Is that,
yes, so the
right?
feedback we got from Taupo District Council was that they had struggled to get Audit New Zealand to do their annual report.
Oh, right.
And that they were under the pump, that they were well behind, and that they had a schedule of work in front of them that was going to keep them busy for a while to come. And so they weren't regarded as being a viable contractor for this purpose.
If I could just add to that, I am aware that Audit NZ are under the pump.
Right.
And there's a number of organisations that traditionally audit, and they've had to fill out to third parties.
Right.
So that's definitely the case. I think there's even questions whether they could do ours at one point.
Just wanted you to know that had been considered. But also just about that comment about the number of organisations, we have been trying for a long time to get somebody to rationalise, but yeah, it just doesn't seem to ever happen. No one wants to do it. But the one thing that I did want to follow on from Andrew's question was about the project that it's still only referring to the nitrogen discharge reduction agreements. Can I just check with you, Neville, because I thought that Taupo District Council wanted it included in the review, that we could actually consider what else might be possible for the trust to do.
Yes.
And I expressed at the time with you and Marley, I think that I had some concerns around that, although, you know, I have some sympathy with that. I had some concerns with where that conversation might go. And whether we might be expected to pay for those additional things. So if you could just comment on that in terms of, is that being included within the scope of this, and how might that be problematical for us?
Yes, I did touch on it earlier, but it's under section 31 scope on page 250 of the report, and under bullet point C. So the scope now also includes outlining the potential options for the Trust to diversify and continue its operations in relation to the long-term protection of Lake Taupo, making best use of its operating capability, establishing place in the community, relationships with stakeholders, and status as a registered charitable trust. In doing so, consider relevant examples of other charitable trusts and funding fundraising organisations involved in long-term ecological environmental protection in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So that is a component that was really Taupo District Council, and we've accepted that of its inclusion because it's not binding. So they can go away. It doesn't say that they continue to manage the NDRAs. It says that maybe there's something else they could do of their own volition. Who knows how they're going to be funded, and here's some options for them to consider. Now, I don't believe that it puts a burden on WRC to say, oh, we're going to contribute to that, or we support that. It say, well, that's, in my view, is something that if they want to do it, good luck. But we're not bound to have to support or fund that arrangement going forward. It is in conflict, I guess, with the other parts where we talked about all the other entities, and here's another one that may exist in the future, but I don't think, regardless of the recommendation back from the reviewers, that we're bound to have to do anything about that. To be frank, I think it's Taupo District Council's way of moving forward, noting that they are so attached to the trust and its view and their ratepayers' views that it has value and meaning for the lake.
Stu, you had the light on, it's off now. But
Just to wrap up, I think people also lose sight of the fact that the 27 agreements that the trust have oversight of, it is the smaller part of the number of farmers in that catchment that all farm under resource consents who I think are free to trade amongst themselves if they so wish to via the Regional Council. So, but I guess the key point is, Neville, as part of this review, whoever the reviewer is will have an obligation to consult with the likes of ourselves to ensure that, because to me it's about making sure they've got the full picture, not just part of the picture.
And I'll ensure that that's established for all three settlers, that they have an absolute obligation to engage in dialogue.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, we had a good round or two, and for a pound or two, and thanks very much, Neville, for answering those questions. I'll formally put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. The next item is that on exclusion of the public. I so move for the reasons on the overhead that we exclude the public from this section of the meeting. Moved by Remington, second by McPherson. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. These are minutes of the meetings